Recording in progress.
There we go. Okay. Well, looks like everybody's starting to file in here. Welcome everyone to Mornings with Planning, a webinar series.
Recording stopped.
The first
Recording in
Wednesday
progress.
of every month, where the Lexington Division of Planning discusses new ways to reconnect, reimagine, and respond in a new reality. These webinars will be held live via Zoom and on Lex TV, and is also being recorded for later viewing at imaginelexington.com, as well as on Saturday at 1 o'clock on Lex TV. This webinar is available for AICP credit for those of you accredited planners in the audience. My name is Chris Woodall. I'm the manager of long range planning for the city of Lexington, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's session. You may have tuned in expecting to see Lauren Weaver, our previous moderator for this series, but she's since moved on to another position in the government for the city of Lexington. So for better or worse, you're stuck with me for this morning. During this webinar, we'll be discussing the topic of automated vehicles, the vast potential that they hold for disrupting our transportation systems, and the benefits and uncertainties that come with that new technology. So with that, kick back with your morning coffee or tea, and let's meet today's panelists. Today, we've got three panelists joining us. We've got Tara Andringa, is the Executive Director of PAVE, or the Partners for Automated Vehicle Education. We've got Eric Hill, the Director of Transportation System Management and Operations for MetroPlan in Orlando, Florida. And then I'm pleased to introduce you all to one of the newer additions to the Division of Planning. That's Chris Avelia, AICP, who's the Transportation Planning Manager for the city of Lexington and is also the Lexington Area MPO Director. So panelists, thank you for joining us this morning. And we'll start with a brief background and overview of you all. So we'll start with Tara. Tara Andringa is the Executive Director of Partners for Automated Vehicle Education, or PAVE, a nonprofit coalition focused on engaging with the public about automated vehicles and the potential to improve the safety, mobility, and sustainability of our transportation system. Ms. Andringa has led the group since its public launch in January of 2019 and has more than 25 years of experience in communications, policy, and coalition management. Prior to PAVE, Ms. Andringa spent 2 decades as a communications director in the United States Senate, managing public relations for a U.S. Senate office and several Senate committees, including the Senate Auto Caucus. So Tara, thank you for joining us. If you don't mind, give the folks at home a little bit of some background information about maybe how you got into automated vehicles and your interest and expertise in the field.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris, so much. And thank you for having me. Really excited to be part of this conversation this morning. So yeah, my group is a little unusual. So PAVE, or Partners for Automated Vehicle Education, is a group that we're really, our goal is just to have a conversation with the public about automated vehicles. And the idea is that this is the biggest potential change to our transportation system really in 100 years, in a century. And a lot of people aren't well served by our current system, whether it's, they are unable to drive a car, or it's financially unfeasible to own a car. And this is a chance to really kind of do it again, to look at our transportation system and make sure that all the things that aren't going well now, we can have a safer highway system. We can have a more sustainable, more equitable system that offers more mobility to more people. But when you talk to people about automated vehicles, often people don't even have the knowledge they need to even be part of the conversation. There's a lot of confusion about what an automated vehicle is, how it works. And so what our group aims to do is to give people the knowledge and facts they need to be part of the conversation, to advocate for themselves. Every single person is a stakeholder in the transportation system, and we want everyone to be able to be part of that conversation. So that's what our group aims to do. How I got into this is a funny conversation. I'm actually from Michigan, from Detroit, so grew up in the auto industry. Got into government, like you mentioned. I worked in the U.S. Senate for 21 years. And I was a communications director and for the Senate Auto Caucus and some other groups. So it's kind of a strange combination of I've done communications for a long time and government and public policy and cars. And so when PAVE came about, it was kind of the perfect combination of some things in my background. So yeah, really excited to talk to the people of Lexington today about what AVs could mean for Lexington and how, your community can start to get ready for the potential arrival. Really glad to be with you, Chris.
That's great. Thank you, Tara. And that's exactly why we wanted you to be on this panel. That outreach and education is incredibly important. And you're right, it's going to disrupt our transportation network, and it's coming. And so it's about being ready for that and certainly understanding what that means. So thank you for bringing that to the table. Eric, we'll move to you. So Mr. Eric Hill has been employed in the transportation industry since 1984. His career in transportation industry includes progressively responsible positions with Transit Agency, Planning Authority, and Transportation Research Center. In his position at Metroplan Orlando, the MPO for the Orlando urbanized area, it includes 3 counties. He's responsible for planning and implementing transportation systems management and operation strategies that use information and communication technologies to enhance the transportation network within the Metroplan Orlando area. He's active in several local and national transportation committees, and we are certainly very lucky to have him all the way from Orlando, Florida. So thank you so much for joining us. I'll pose the same question to you, Eric. If you could give us a little bit about the work that you've done maybe on in some of those national committees that are looking at some of this, certainly your work at Metroplan, and then how you got involved in autonomous vehicles.
Sure. Thank you, Chris, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this program. I always enjoy and take advantage of the opportunity to speak about my work and certainly speak about technology in transportation, because it's not only about autonomous vehicles, but it's about technology and how technology is changing transportation as we know it. Before we get to autonomous vehicles, we're going to have connected vehicles, which many of us are already driving. And with autonomous vehicles, the whole notion is, how do we change transportation from a experience where we as humans are operating the vehicles to where the vehicles and the technologies are operating the vehicles. That is what I am trying to do, and trying to spread the word and how there's evolution occurring. What as MPOs we were designed and or established to do was build roadway capacity. And that was the 20th century. In the 21st century, it's not about building roadway capacity, but how do we make that network that we established over 50 years more efficient and more effective and more safe and reliable. And that's where the technology comes into play. That's my mission that I've been on now for at least the last 10, 15 years. But prior to that, and how I ventured into technology and transportation, and specifically autonomous vehicles, goes back to my early childhood. When I was probably, I think, 6 or 7, my parents brought my brother and I this race car track. And it was basically a piece of plastic. It was oval. It was just a piece of plastic with some wires. And when you put the cars on the track, underneath the cars was a little stylus that went into a groove. And so as you press your button, it would electrify the wires, and there was a magnet that just drug the cars around the track. Fast forward to when I was in graduate school, late 1980s, I had the notion again. If we just put stylus underneath cars into a groove, then the cars could operate themselves, or someone else could. And right about that time, the Federal Highway Administration was experimenting with a similar technology out in Southern California, where they had a test track where they basically had vehicles that had magnets, magnets in the pavement that just directed the vehicles and how they could travel. And so I, at that point, knew I was on to something, just didn't know how to articulate it all that well, but managed to stay with it. And now it has come to fruition.
That's interesting. Yeah, I can certainly relate to the younger folks and the fascination with the cars and the transportation. And it's certainly, I've got three of my own, and I see them making little observations, and you never know where the next technologies are going to come from. So that's really interesting. And it's go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to add, that notion started when I was a child, and one of the challenges that we have in transportation and industry is a workforce vacuum. A vacuum that is largely made up of, as I said, planners and engineers that were developed during an era when we were building roadway capacity. And that's changing. The demands and workforce and the skill sets are changing. And so that is an area that we have to be more cognizant of, and the type of talent that we're trying to develop. And so, again, for me, it was when I was a child, that's where the notion started. And so I'm sure there's a young person now that has a notion that in 20 years is going to be their mission.
Absolutely. And I liked how you talked about the evolution of things as well, and how we got to where we are now. It's certainly a winding road that has had a lot of different stops along the way. And we've got a long way to go before we can get to fully autonomous vehicles that are completely driving themselves. But again, this conversation, this education, and certainly bringing maybe this conversation will spark somebody's interest in the field and cause them to look deeper. Like I said, you never really know where the next ideas are coming from. So I certainly appreciate that sentiment. So thank you, Eric. Chris, we'll move on to you. So last but not least, Chris Avelia is one of our own here with the Lexington Division of Planning. He's been a professional transportation planner since 1995 with tenures in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Waco, and is currently right where we want him here in Lexington, Kentucky. So Mr. Avelia is the planning manager and director for the Lexington area MPO and the 2-county planning area, providing long-range transportation policy direction and coordinating regional project development. He's a graduate of New Orleans with the University of New Orleans with a Bachelor of Arts in Geography, received his professional certification, AICP, in 2001. He's previously served as the chair of the Association of MPOs Technical Committee and as the executive director of the Texas Association of MPOs. Mr. Avelia currently serves in leadership role with the Association of MPOs Emerging Technologies Work Group. Chris, thank you for spending some time with us this morning. I'll ask you kind of the same question about your interest and what you're bringing to the conversation here.
Well, good morning. And for those of you in the Lexington region I have not had the pleasure of meeting yet, I look forward to being able to meet you and having a conversation about transportation. But I think probably maybe it'd be good to just do 30 seconds about what an MPO is. What is a metropolitan planning organization? Because this seems to be something that not a lot of folks are familiar with. So we are a federal organization. We are required for regions of the size of Lexington or larger. And we are a transportation planning organization. Our goal or our charge is to look 25 years into the future, identify how folks are getting from point A to point B during that time frame, what are some of the challenges associated with that, and how do we use our investment of public resources to accomplish an improvement in that transportation network. We start, as Eric mentioned, we started off years ago focusing on highways, but today we're looking at all modes of transportation. And of course, automated vehicles are something that we have an inherent interest within. It stands to change fundamentally how we get from point A to point B, and maybe even what the point A's and point B's end up being. And so Chris Woodall mentioned the issue about this being potentially disruptive. I would prefer to look at this as new opportunities, and new opportunities, as Ms. Andriga mentioned earlier, for those who perhaps have not been able to benefit from the current transportation system in some way, because perhaps they're just not able to physically operate a motor vehicle, or perhaps they're not even legally allowed to operate a motor vehicle. And so this opens up a range of mobility options that for these folks, perhaps was not available to them. And so this is something that we are very interested in having come to Lexington to help us not just make it easier for folks to be able to get where they need to go and the important destinations of life, but to make sure that this is equitably available to all of the people who live within our region. So, Chris, let me hand this back over to you, and let's start looking at some of the questions that have come in.
I love it. And I prefer your term. I like the opportunity as opposed to disruption too. So maybe I'll change my vocab around that one. I'm with you on that. All right. So as Chris said, we are going to move into our questions now. And we did receive several questions from our registrants. And we're going to try to incorporate those into some of the prompts as we discuss momentarily. We appreciate your thoughts and your interest on the topic out there in the audience. And those who are interested in asking questions of our panelists here, feel free to submit questions using the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to incorporate those into our discussion and conversation as we move along. All right, so that's enough table setting. We'll get right into the questions here, and we'll get into some of the more technical and deeper issues as we progress. But I want to start one off with kind of a lighter one to break the ice a little bit. And Tara, we'll just start with you here. Most people generally understand AVs as self-driving cars, and they'll take us a while to get there. What are you most looking forward to in a world where AVs are fully integrated into everyday life?
Thanks so much, Chris. I guess I alluded to a few of these things in my opening remarks, but I'll just repeat. I mean, I think number one is safety. 40,000 people are killed every year on our streets and highways, and a lot of a great majority of those human error is a part of the cause, whether it's people are drowsy or texting and driving or drinking and driving or whatever it is. And I think self-driving cars have the potential to really make our streets safer and save lives. And I think that's kind of the North Star. I also think that AVs have the potential to offer new mobility options for a lot of people. Like I said, a lot of people are either unable to drive or not able to afford car ownership. I always laugh that I both have, a father that I lost to dementia, and then I have two teenage sons. We had to take my dad's keys away, and I frankly would rather my teenage sons didn't have keys themselves. So I kind of, on both ends, I see the great potential for new mobility options for people. And then also, lastly, I would say, equity and I think that's a kind of chance to think about new options for transportation for people who are left out of our current system. Actually, and one last thing, and then I'll say in sustainability, that I think, as we're electrifying cars and taking out the crashes and then the idling from vehicles that's caused by crashes, we also have the chance to make our roads more sustainable. That's a lot, but so I think there are a lot of potential positives.
I agree with you. There certainly are a lot of really good benefits. Eric, what do you see? What are you excited about?
Well, my excitement over the last, I'd say, 5 years has been tempered with the whole misinformation about the technology and where we are. And so that has to be addressed. And I applaud the work that Tara is doing, because for what I have been observing is that outreach and providing information on the technology and where the technology is right now and where it's going and its potential. For every crash involving a Tesla that has been in self-driving mode, it just pushes us back in terms of how we can get this technology more in play. Again, the excitement has been tempered. However, the opportunity, again, I can't, say more than what Tara has already said about the opportunity. The challenges, however, which are possibilities in my mind, have to do with sustainability, and sustainability in terms of revenue and how we generate revenue for our transportation system. And then just the whole awareness about the technology. I have to go back to that because it's not going to be, 1 year, someone flicks a switch and everything's self-driving. It's got to be a graduated process. And so that has to occur in a way that people understand, because the opportunities or the benefits from the technology won't occur until we have like a shift, a turnover in the whole fleet of vehicles that are on the road. We get to 85% turnover of that fleet, then we start to really realize those safety benefits. I spoke about reliability because that is another area that we as transportation planners can certainly capitalize on, because everyone wants to make their trip and know that it's going to take them a certain amount of time. They're going to incur certain incidents, but it's at that point that we start to see those benefits occur. And so how we get there is going to get, I applaud Tara's work, because just the information and making people aware of what this technology really can do for us in terms of mobility.
I certainly see that those challenges, but there's potential there as well to get to all the benefits that both you and Tara have spoken about. And Chris, what do you want to add to this to get us started here? What are you most excited about as it pertains to fully bringing the AVs online?
So obviously, the safety and mobility benefits have been discussed previously, are something that we are all striving to accomplish. But there's some low-hanging fruit here that perhaps are a little bit more near-term, that could provide some real benefits to us. We have a driver shortage in terms of CDL drivers, whether it's freight, long-distance freight, or whether it's even our transit systems, where here in Lexington, we've actually had to scale back some of our existing fixed route service because we just don't have enough drivers. This provides us, or vehicle automation provides us some near-term opportunities to perhaps supplement those services and supplement those services at reduced cost. And so we have things like truck platooning, which are already being used in certain corridors. There's a corridor in Texas where that's being implemented. There's another one in Arizona where they're experimenting with that type of service. Still requires, right now, still requires a CDL driver in each vehicle. But eventually, as this technology proves itself out, this gives us an opportunity to transport a lot more freight with less cost and the fewer or a less need for drivers. And so this is one of the more near-term opportunities, perhaps in the next 5 to 10 years, where we can start seeing some real tangible benefits from the technology.
Certainly. And I think, some of the cost saving, I think you could see both sides of that conversation too, where people, whenever we transform to a new way of doing it, that the jobs change, right? So from where they used to be people occupying the vehicles, then, that the industry sort of changes. And so there are discussions on both sides of that. But I certainly think that all three of you have sort of hit on the safety aspects, which are really important here, in taking away some of that human element, where folks might be drowsy or impaired or have other reactionary times that perhaps we're not as good as perhaps a computer or automated vehicle might be in some of those things. So we'll dig deeper into some of that as we move into some of these questions here. But I do want to give kind of our viewers sort of a fundamental understanding of automated vehicles. And I know we've heard about different levels that kind of go from 1 to 5. And I think a lot of people sort of think that we've already got self-driving cars, right? Like people already sort of assume that, well, we've got autonomous vehicles on the road, but that's not exactly true. because we've got different levels. I guess what level are we on right now, I guess is the question. And then what's your projection for when we might see level 5? And then if I could, steal my colleague Chris Avelia's affinity for dad jokes here, could you all give us a crash course on the technology and how it generally works? I think the people out there understand that there are some functions that can have these cars drive, but how does it actually work?
Okay. Sure. And I was going to start off by saying that, Eric, your car connected vehicles using magnets does sound very attractive. But anyway, we've got 5 levels of automation, but there's actually kind of a 6th level, which represents no automation at all. These are the vehicles that are predominantly on the road right now, and these require the human being to actually operate and perform all tasks associated with operation of that vehicle. And then as we move from left to right, we have increasing levels where the vehicle itself takes on some of those tasks. Many of us are probably familiar with level 1 technology, where we have one or maybe a handful of tasks that the vehicle operates right now, such as perhaps a self-parking feature or adaptive cruise control, something like that. Right now, probably the highest level of automation that's you can actually purchase on the market right now would be level 2. And that would be something similar to the Tesla vehicles that are out there right now. Still requires quite a bit of operation on the part of the human operator. But it does allow for a little bit more autonomy in certain circumstances. But even in those circumstances, the human operator has to be very aware of what's going on, because at any moment in time, they may have to take over control of that vehicle. And then as we get over to the right, we now start talking about the vehicle taking over more and more of those tasks until we get to level 5, which is complete automation. The human occupant does not have to engage in any of the tasks associated with operation of that vehicle. And so that's a really quick high-level overview of the different levels of automation. And I'll let my panelists add anything that they feel is appropriate here.
I'll just add a couple things. One is if anyone is interested in or thinks about an autonomous vehicle, think about the last time you took a ride on a roller coaster or you went to a theme park. I mean, that's basically you're on an automated vehicle. And many airports have shuttles that operate between the airside and then the terminals, and they're operated by autonomously. And then the notion of when you get into a vehicle that has no steering wheel or no pedals for you to operate, that is fully autonomous. And then the idea of giving up a certain amount of freedom, the whole notion of human behavior and interaction between our vehicles is another area that we have to overcome before we fully engage ourselves in vehicle autonomy. Just all I wanted to add.
Actually, and I'll add just a couple of points too. First of all, I want to echo what Eric said earlier about the Tesla crashes and how that's been so confusing to people in society. We just saw the SAE levels are super helpful. They were designed for industry though, and are useful for engineers talking about levels of cars. I personally don't think we're ever going to get to the point that just people in the public are going to be able to say, oh, this is a level 2 function, this is a level 3 function. For the public's, what's important for the public, I think it really needs to be black and white. Level 0 for 3, the human is control, period. No matter what cool, fancy things the car can do itself. And even Tesla, if you look at their website and the teeny tiny, halfway down the website says this technology requires a human to be in control. the fact that it's called full self-driving, the fact that it's called autopilot, I think can really be confusing. But as Chris said, it's a level 2 technology. If we're looking at level 0 through 5, we're just on level 2. And that's really not only tragically has caused people to die because they thought that the car was capable of things it wasn't, but I think it also has hurt what will be real self-driving cars because people see that and think that's not safe. Whereas a Tesla is not intended to be a self-driving car. And I think that's why public education is so important, that people need to understand anything on the roads today, period. Anything that you can buy at a car dealer requires full human concentration and a human being in control. And I really think that's the single most important lesson for people to understand right now. Again, cars, the engineering is amazing. They can go do cool things, and technologies available today can make our roads a lot safer. The driver assistance systems can help with safety a lot, but it requires a attentive human behind the steering wheel always.
Yeah, I think that's really important for people to understand, and that's kind of why we brought it up here as sort of one of the baseline things to discuss is, where exactly are we? Because we've got a long way to go. We've come a long way, and as you said, the technology is very cool, and the things that it's allowing us to do, where the past 10, 15 years would have been unimaginable for the average person. But we do still have a long way to go. There's a lot of information that needs to be disseminated. And Tara, this kind of leads into another question that we had. I know you're doing a lot of public education, but you've also done a lot of policy work. So in our line of work here in long range planning and city planning, we understand that change is hard, and oftentimes it's incremental, it's slow, it takes time. So what are the most challenging paradigm shifts that you've encountered in your work thus far, but also that you expect moving forward? And do you think it's going to be the technology, or do you think it's going to be the public policy that are going to be the major barriers to us sort of getting to where we need to go?
Okay, this is going to sound like a cop-out answer because I'm not going to choose. I'll actually put into, the truth is it's all a challenge. This is obviously a hard problem, and I'll put into 3 buckets what I think the big challenges are. One is the technology, but frankly, there are really smart people working on that. By the time this self-driving cars actually exist, it will be the most tested technology in the history of the world, period. And right now that they're all in testing. So people say like, oh, is it safe right now? Well, yes, but that's why you can't go to a car dealer and buy it right now. This technology is being tested, and this is just a really quick story, but Aurora, which is one of our members of PAVE, which is a self-driving car company in California. I heard one of their founders talking a couple of years ago about every time one of their cars is driving, and there's always a safety driver, and they have to do a disengagement. So the human takes over because they're not sure if the car is going to be able to handle this. So the human takes over. What they do is they have their computer still running. So even though the human is in control, you still get to see what the car would have done. And someone in the audience asked him, how often does the car actually get through the situation? Would it have done it safely? And he said, like 99% of the time, the car actually would have handled it better than the human, just because the reaction time is that much faster, or the car can see 360 when the human can only see ahead of them. Again, so the technology is amazing, but it's still in testing. So the technology is clearly a big hurdle. The public policy piece is also a challenge, and just another, again, a funny example I'll give. So all the federal motor vehicle safety standards is basically the big encyclopedia of all kind of laws that oversee cars. Right now, one of the things that in the FMVSS is, like for example, if you have a turn signal on and turn a steering wheel a certain amount, that the turn signal goes off or on. it's literally written in a way they never even contemplated a car without a steering wheel. There's no way right now for a car to be on a road that doesn't have a steering wheel. Again, it sounds simple, but there's just a lot of things like that that are baked into our laws that we need to rethink. And again, it's not an impossible hurdle. It's just a lot of kind of reimagining the current system. But the last thing I want to add, and I'm going to sound like a broken record here, is just education. And that's kind of the reason my group exists, is because we're making these huge technology improvements. But we believe that we will never realize all that potential if the public's not on board. And right now, if you look at public opinion polls, people by and large say they don't understand the technology. They don't quite trust it. They don't know if they would get in a self-driving car. And I don't think we'll ever, the public needs to be on board. The public needs to understand the technology and embrace it, to realize all the potential. So I think we need to, all three of those things, working on the technology, working on the public policy, and working on the kind of public engagement piece, all need to happen together.
Yeah, I certainly can understand and respect that answer. These are complicated, multi-pronged issues that you're dealing with when you're talking about public policy and really shifting a paradigm for the way things have been for a long time. And I think you're right. You have to sort of bring people along with that and create that understanding. And so, yes, I think that's very important. So thank you for providing that insight there. Eric, we'll move along to a question specifically for you here. Of course, anybody can chime in as you want to, but we've had some questions come in about from our audience about affordability in the future for these AVs. So we know that affluent individuals, often younger folks, are usually the early adopters of these types of technologies. So do you see that being the case here? And then what are the current conversations around affordability and equitable access to AVs and the broad benefits that they provide?
Sure. If you can go to the next slide real quick, just so we can get, I'm sorry, next slide. Okay, thanks. So I've been involved in some research on emerging technologies in transportation, and certainly autonomous vehicles are part of that. But a lot of it in terms of access, let's start there. Access and affordability. You look at a large portion of our society do not have access to technology to begin with, whether it is just the connectivity, not having a device that is going to connect them to the internet, or affordability. You see the data here on the number of people that are unbanked or underbanked. And for a lot of these technologies, the use of technology, you have to be able to afford it. You have to be able to have that digital currency to access this technology. In terms of how it's going to be adopted and engaged, we have completed a connected and autonomous vehicle study a couple of years ago. And certainly it is the more affluent individuals, households that can readily engage and purchase these vehicles. But like with most of the technology that has been brought about in vehicles, I'll start, going back a few decades ago when you had vehicles, the luxury vehicles that had the braking systems that did not cause the car to slide. And then we had cruise control. And those were all on luxury vehicles in the beginning, but as the technology became more and more used, it started to prove itself, and it became more affordable, so that your more affordable vehicles started having all those devices in the vehicles. And so I see it's going to become the same process as we move forward. Sure, to begin with the more well-off being able to purchase these vehicles as is right now, to at some point in 20 years, the technology will be, as Tara just said, so tested, so proven that, yeah, we can put it in the lower end model vehicles. So that in terms of the adoption and the engagement and how we start to see more and more of these vehicles on the roadway. That's the process that's going to occur. And again, as I said earlier, it's not going to be someone's going to hit a switch. It's going to be a graduation. And let me shift real quick, if I could, to the issue of equity. And a lot of this, again, has to do, and this is, we've done the connected and autonomous vehicle study, but also we're doing an equity audit now. In that map that you see there is our planning area, but that red area is the area that we call, or we've determined to be environmental justice areas, or areas that are either minorities or low-income residents. And those are the individuals that either do not have vehicles, have one vehicle, or use transit. And so how will this technology impact this area in terms of mobility? And again, not to sound like a broken record, like Tara said, it's about education, it's about information. And how do we go to these communities and explain the technology in a way that makes sense to them, in a way that it helps them to see the benefits and how it's going to enable their mobility. But we also have to address that question of, okay, how is the technology also going to perhaps be detrimental to me? And in a sense, this technology, it can have go sideways. Usually when I go to an audience and I give a presentation on the work I do, technology and transportation, I always ask the question, how many people in here have a Facebook account? And usually everybody raises their hand. And this was back when Facebook got hacked. And I said, were you happy when Facebook, released all your data to a third party? And nobody was happy. And my point is, I'm infatuated with technology, but I'm not in love with it because it can go sideways. And so do we create an atmosphere where technology and transportation starts to impede upon our ability to have access? For example, and I've used this story with one of my sons. Right now, you can pretty much drive on any road you want to. And one of the comments that was made that I use as part of this story with my son is, we had a planner at one of our workshops say, in order for an autonomous vehicle to work in my city, we have to have the technology in place. We have to have the infrastructure in place for that vehicle to operate. But what if we don't want that vehicle to operate in our community? Then we don't have to invest in that tech. We don't have to invest in the infrastructure to allow it to work. Well, you really don't want that. But the point is, like walled gardens, if you have a community or a neighborhood that does not want you to have access, well, then it can cause the vehicle not to go through that neighborhood. It can reduce the access that you have to certain areas. So that's something that we have to be mindful of in how this technology is used. Again, I'm infatuated, not in love with it, because it can go sideways. And so that becomes one of the challenges. Another challenge I'll touch on real quick because I think is really important. Chris mentioned this in freight, but it's not just freight, but the whole workforce. This technology will impact a huge swath of workforce, from the way vehicles are built to the way vehicles are sold. Okay, and I'll start with a quick story from one of our engineers in our planning area who went out and purchased a vehicle a couple of years ago. But he went in, spoke with one salesman, went to one dealership, spoke with a salesman. Salesman really didn't know a whole lot about the car, just wanted to sell. And then he went to another dealership and spoke with a salesperson who knew everything about this car. Even answered that question of what kind of technology is involved or it's in this vehicle. Does it have self-driving technology? How can that technology be used? That salesman was informed. And I presume that's where he purchased. But the point is the workforce, how it's going to change the workforce. Most of these vehicles are going to be electric vehicles. I just recently read an article, I think there's 137 operating parts in an internal combustion engine and 17 in electric vehicles. What does that do for, again, how vehicles are made, how vehicles are maintained, and then how vehicles are sold? As part of our connected and autonomous vehicle study, we also wanted to make sure that our partners, the jurisdictions, were ready for this technology. And that is how do they make the investments in the infrastructure? Again, it's not going to be about capacity building. It's going to be about connectivity, information, communication, technology. And so that's where we have to shift, not only from the jurisdiction level, but as MPOs. Chris and I, we've had discussion with, as MPOs, how do we change? Are we ready for this? Because it changes the whole revenue scheme, and the investment scheme, the priorities that we make, it changes. And so are we ready, and how do we prepare ourselves?
Eric, you've covered a lot of ground there, and you've read my mind, because as we're starting to talk about the impacts to communities that these things would have, how are commuting patterns going to start to shift? What are those infrastructure changes that you were talking about? I'm on the land use planning side. Like, I'm really glad we have Chris over there on the other end of the hall that can help us out with our transportation things. But we know that transportation and land use are incredibly interdependent and linked. And so those things are going to impact how we continue to grow, how we continue to develop. There'll be changes to right of way. There'll be changes to our infrastructure. A couple of the questions that have come in today have asked questions about, we're looking at efficiency and transport and technology changes that are wonderful for the automobile. What does that mean for the people outside of the car? What does that mean for the pedestrian experience? So Eric, you threw a lot at me. I'm throwing a lot back at you all. But I'm hoping you all could help us understand, what are we looking at from a land use side and the changes that we're expecting to see.
So, and that's one of those on the fence questions for me, because there's this notion that, you can live, further and further away from where you work. You can get in the car and you can sit back and go to sleep or read a book, and the car is going to drive itself. That's one scenario. The other scenario is the scenario of, you own a vehicle, but you don't use that vehicle. And I'm at the other extreme here, where that vehicle now starts to work for you, because it's a connected vehicle. You can, with your smartphone, you can summons the car. It can come pick you up, take you wherever you need to go. And then it goes and does another trip, right? Well, what happens then is, if everyone, for example, if each of us has a connected vehicle or autonomous vehicle, we haven't taken vehicles off the road. There's still a vehicle on the road, right? And now, not only is that vehicle on the road, that vehicle is out there, riding around on the road looking for a trip. Okay, so how do we, again, address the potential congestion that would cause? Yeah. So the scenarios are many, and so that question on land use. Do we still need to have, here in Florida, do we still need to build these mini mansions with 3-car garages? Do we need to, again, widen our roads? Because the notion that these cars can operate very, very efficiently, they can operate very close to each other. What happens when you have congestion is, when the cars move, they don't all move at the same time. And that's why there's continued congestion. Well, in this scenario, all the cars will move at the same time, which is more efficient, right? So again, a lot of unanswered questions. It's going to take us a while to get through this.
Well, I think you're right. Tara, Chris, what do we think this is going to mean kind of for the pedestrian experience? And what are the discussions around the people outside of the car?
Yeah, I want to talk about that and kind of this, and I'll bring that up in sort of what I wanted, the bigger answer I wanted to say. I was looking at some of the questions that have come in that are really great questions. And I was realizing and reading the questions, and I wish we had kind of brought this up sooner because it's such a critical point. Most of this conversation has been about passenger vehicles, which is obviously a lot of what the conversation about autonomous vehicles is about, but that is really just one tiny slice of the technology and what it can do. So like my group is a membership organization, and we have a bunch of, so many different, we have several companies that are working on buses and shuttles. We have a bunch that are working on freight vehicles like trucks. And this technology is not just for single passenger vehicle. And a couple of the questions in the chat were asking about transit and safe streets and walkability. And as we've been talking about, I think that we really need to be thinking about this holistically about our transportation system. Passenger vehicles are one piece, but I really credit Lexington for having this conversation, because it's one of the things that communities really need to be thinking about is how do we integrate this technology into our existing transportation system? And just an example, like I live in the DC area in Northern Virginia, and we have a just that launched actually during the pandemic. So in the last year or so, DC has a metro system. And then there's a shopping area about a mile from the closest metro station, and there wasn't an easy way to get there. And so they created an autonomous shuttle that literally just does a loop, all day long to pick people up from the metro station and to take them to the shopping area and then back to the metro station. And that's just one example, though, about how autonomous technology can be used to integrate it with an existing transit. And in no way do I want to suggest that this technology is intended to replace mass transit, which is such a critical piece. So yeah, I think we really need to think about this, like you said, in terms of pedestrians and bicyclists, and how can we make the whole system work better. And I don't want to take all the time, but one other thing I just wanted to mention quickly, and you were asking about infrastructure. A lot of other members of our group are work for accessibility organizations, like a United Spinal, which represents wheelchair users. And something that they talk a lot about is also, as we're thinking about this technology, we need to think about how to make our infrastructure more accessible. And a good example is like on a curb, a wheelchair user currently might need another human to help them get from the curb into the car. If we're thinking about vehicles that don't have a driver, don't necessarily have another human, we need to ensure that the infrastructure in our communities allows all users to get into a vehicle. And I just heard someone the other day talking about, but this isn't just for wheelchair users. This is useful for, think about a parent with a stroller or a traveler with a wheeled suitcase. If we think about infrastructure that's accessible, it really makes it more accessible for everyone. Anyway, so I think we really need to think about all these pieces of the transportation system.
Right, and the only thing I'm going to add here is that really at some point we're all pedestrians. Whether it's walking from the vehicle to our house or to our office or whatever that final destination is, we're all pedestrians, and that's something that we as the MPO still have a vested interest in. And one of the challenges that we kind of see in the future is that we have a lot more vehicles on our roadway system, many of these kind of deadheading to try to find another trip. How do we make sure that folks can still get across our roadway network safely and in a reasonable amount of time?
So I want to just tell a quick story. About 4 or 5 years ago, I read this book. It had to do with technology and transportation. With autonomous vehicles, the writer, he gave this scenario. You have this community and it has a popular park. A lot of people want to go to this park. And this is a community of autonomous vehicles, right? And so the people who live near this park are always complaining that people who want to visit the park take up the parking spaces that the residents use, right? So one of the residents has this ingenious idea. He finds this paint that simulates water. And so he paints all the parking spaces with this paint. So now the autonomous vehicles, they see paint, they see water. They don't see parking spaces, they see water. So they end up just circulating around this community looking for parking spaces. that is one of the things that, on the pedestrian side, on the parking side, we have to be mindful of. And again, I like to tell that story because it seems very plausible, because these vehicles, the technology is making intellectual decisions. It's not making common sense type decisions, right? It's just looking at data and processing the data. And that is, that's another area, the data. These vehicles, everything now is about the data, and these vehicles will accumulate data, it will share data, it will collect data, will put data out. And that is the one of the concerns that I have is how that data is being used.
Certainly. Well, it's good to know, and we're kind of coming to the end of our time here, and it's amazing how quickly an hour can go by. But it's good to hear that in the realm of these discussions, that these are topics that are being talked about, discussed. We've seen in our current transportation network that we've got right now the evidence of how when we let a technology sort of drive the way we develop our community, and we focus in on one particular piece, that perhaps we lose the others, which is how to be the pedestrians that we all are. So it's important for us, Tara, as you mentioned, take a holistic look at this technology and figure out how we can harness the good things and then mitigate the potential issues that come along with it. And this is a lot to cram into an hour. This is years and years worth of study and discussion have gone into these. So I really quick, we'll do one quick parting question. If you all could give me just a real short, quick snap answer. If you could say one thing that Lexington should be doing right now in preparation for this, near term, what should we be looking at as we're looking at the future of autonomous vehicles? So Tara, we'll start with you, and we'll kind of work our way around and wrap this up.
I'll be real quick. First, I just want to give Lexington credit. Two things that you're already doing. One is this conversation, just giving people in the community a chance to ask questions, to think about these issues. Again, they're tough things that we're all thinking through and talking through. People's concerns are real. No one has all the answers. And so I think giving people a chance to talk about this and just to have a society-wide conversation is critical. And number two, I know at the university, you already have some of those automated delivery vehicles going around. I think that's a perfect example of a way that the community can get exposure to the technology, see something great that it can do that's useful. It's a helpful thing, but it doesn't have a human inside. And so it kind of, in some ways, takes some of the fear that some people have out. So I think kind of giving people exposure. And so my answer then to your question, but what else can you do? I would say just keep building on that. Things like demonstrations where people can have a ride in an AV, kind of see what it's like, experiencing it firsthand. And then just keep building on, town halls, education, a chance to for the community to think about it together.
Great, thank you. Eric?
Yeah, I will ditto everything that Tara said, because everything she said in our connected autonomous vehicle study, those are the three things we touched on: was demonstrations, doing more demonstrations, doing more outreach, and then making the investments in your staff so that your staff becomes more aware and connected and understand what the technology does and what it doesn't do. But it also helps to address that misinformation that's out there. And as part of that study, one of the things we wanted to do is we wanted to be the resource that the community came to when they had questions on it. Because if they go to the state DOT, and this criticism of the state DOT, but you start to get the real heavy engineering type answers. We wanted to just be able to explain the technology in a way that everyone can understand. So that's one of the areas I would also emphasize.
Thank you, Eric. And Chris?
All right, well, I've got 1 minute. So real quickly, in the next 6 to 12 months, we're going to be beginning a CAV readiness study for our region, very similar to what Metro Plan Orlando has already put together. So folks can take a look at that. We've provided a link on this chat for folks to take a look at that. We are going to begin this conversation in earnest. We've already had a good conversation with our Kentucky Transportation Cabinet on some of the things that they're working on. So folks can expect that very shortly from our perspective.
All right. Well, thank you, Chris. So, folks, if you have a question we didn't discuss today, I'd like for you all to consider reaching out to imagine@lexingtonky.gov. Again, just to let you all know, if you're seeking AICP credits, this session is eligible. Maybe later today or tomorrow, you should check the APA website to be able to log those. If you want to watch this webinar again or share it with a friend or colleague via you can go to our website again at imaginelexington.com, or you can see it on Lex TV Saturday at 1 o'clock. Again, I want to thank our panelists here for spending some time with us. We're very grateful for the expertise that you've brought to the conversation. Tara and Dringa, again, Executive Director of PAVE, Partners for Autonomous Vehicle Education, Automated Vehicle Education, excuse me. Eric Hill, the Director of Transportation System Management and Operations for Metroplan Orlando. Chris Avelia, AICP, Transportation Planning Manager and Lexington Area MPO Director. He was also the coordinator for this and brought these fine folks to the table for this discussion. So we thank you for that. Our live Q&A support has been provided by Valerie Friedman. If you all want to click the links while they're still open in the next minute or so, I would encourage you all to do that. Thank you, Valerie, for that. Of course, Libby Jefferson is our technical support. Thank you to our Lex TV folks. And of course, certainly none of this would be possible without the audience, you all joining us in for these conversations every month. The Mornings with Planning webinar series will continue to discuss new ways to reconnect, reimagine, and respond in a new reality. And we want to hear from you. What topics should we discuss as we move Lexington forward together? Email us at imagine@lexingtonky.gov to let us know. We'll be back on the first Wednesday of December for a special 90-minute visually rich edition of Mornings with Planning, where we'll tackle the topic of urban design. This is going to have some real-time markups with some talented design professionals, so we're really excited about this one. For more information on future sessions, or to access the recording for this webinar, you can visit imaginelexington.com or lexingtonky.gov/planning and follow us on social media. Again, thank you so much to our panelists for being here, and thank you for spending your morning with us. We will see you next time.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.